Hey everyone, this is Tanner from Off the Wire. We have a special treat for you this week. It's a bonus episode. Anthony recently caught up with Brian Williams from Rubrik at the North Carolina Local Government Technology Conference. They sat down and had a great conversation where Brian really went over his expert insights into the current state of backups, why backups remain critical, and how they really serve as our last line of defense in the fight against hackers. Let's listen in.
All right, hello everyone. This is Anthony with Off the Wire, and I've got Brian Williams with Rubrik, and we're at the wonderful NCLGISA conference in 2024. We're in downtown Wilmington. I don't think you can really see how beautiful it is out there through the window, but trust me, it's gorgeous out here. Matter of fact, I'm feeling a little crazy for being in this building right now. But anyways, this is an exciting podcast. We're going to talk with Brian about backups. And, you know, it's one of those things. I just remember when I first started doing IT, one of my mentors and one of the people that, you know, kind of introduced me to the IT world, he said, Anthony, the most important job you have is backups. And honestly, that still sticks to me to this day. And I don't really have my hands in the weeds. Some of my folks do. But anyways, backups is something that we make sure we look at on a monthly basis to ensure we do a recovery. It's just one of those things where, you know, you need to be doing backups right. You know, it's not just cybersecurity. You can just have issues, you know, as well that takes that stuff down. But anyways, enough about that. Well, actually, before I turn over to Brian, I do want to say, so a couple years ago, we made the migration over to Rubrik. And I'll say this, it was nothing but a phenomenal process. They spent a lot of time with us onboarding, making sure we're comfortable with the product. And then we'll talk about this a little bit later, but one of the things that just completely caught me off guard is you guys meeting with us quarterly to make sure everything's going all right.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. So, you know, you talked about like your mentor basically saying, hey, backups are probably one of the most important things you have to do. I think somewhere along the lines, it kind of lost its luster as like, oh, of course, I run backups and I check the backups, right? But I was having a conversation with a gentleman yesterday where I basically told him, and this is absolutely true, the backup engineer is probably one of the most important people in your organization today. Yeah. Right? And I think it's really important because backups are no longer just ho-hum, I take a copy of the data from here to here, and if someone fat fingers, I can get it back. It's so much more now, and the elevation of the backup engineer of old is really phenomenal to see that ascension. So
yeah, that's what I missed the. You know, I was thinking about it just recently. Back in the good old days, you could, you know, we'd put it on tape. That's what that's what I was used to.
Yeah.
And not that we would ever go back to that, but I was just thinking, you know, that actually is a pretty secure method. You know, we would all take it off site typically. Yeah. And I remember we would drive down to the bank once a week and swap out tapes.
Swap out tapes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so funny because I talk a lot about air gapping and immutability, which we'll get into a little bit in our discussion today. But to this day, I still maintain that air gap is probably the best, or tape rather, is the best air gap you can have.
Yeah.
You know, it's just hard to beat. There's a lot more new technology that we can talk about as far as like, you know, the logical air gapping and stuff like that and the way it's achieved. Because if you're recovering from tape, right, the biggest downfall is, well, I got to call Iron Mountain. I got to wait for them to deliver the tape or go to the bank and stand in line. Yeah. It's just not meant for like today's modern use cases.
Well, and the speeds. I mean, granted, it's been a decade since I touched a tape, but I would imagine it would be really, really slow.
Really slow. Yeah, I haven't touched tape since, gosh, 2011 probably.
Yeah. I think I was one of the late people to leave tapes because, matter of fact, we actually had a device that would encrypt the backup on the tape. Even.
Yeah.
Anyways, I held out as long as I could.
Yeah, there's still some holdover. I still work with tape today in 2024.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's still some people holding out, just white knuckling it until they can no longer do so.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I don't blame them with everything that's going on.
Right.
I guess the first question, I was thinking we could kind of just go into some fundamentals, but can you discuss the 3-2-1 method and the 4-3-2 method? I know there's a few other variables out there. But
there are, and so I talk a lot about the 3-2-1. I don't talk so much about the 4-3-2, but just for explanation, the 3-2-1's 3 copies, 2 types of media, 1 offsite. Mm-hmm. That's typically what you're going to see because it kind of covers all the bases in a world where the worst thing that can happen to your data is, fire, flood, famine, kaiju, right? The dangerous things like that. Then they brought the 432, which is, I had to write this down because I couldn't remember, four copies, 3 locations, and 2 offsites.
Yeah.
And, Anthony, the more I thought about this, the more I realized that this approach, while good, it's when are we going to have a 543 or, or a 654? Like, I think people get kind of hung up with, well, the more copies of my data I have, the better I am. And I think it's more today is preserving that prime copy of the data, and then the additional resiliency of offsiting it for like regional disasters or something like that is good. I would never dissuade someone from that, but I think we have to be very careful of getting trapped in the mindset of, okay, I have 1 million copies of my data, so obviously I'm safe against anything, right? But if you don't preserve and maintain and take good care of that prime copy of the data, then you're just going to be replicating bad data. So what good is the 7th copy of it if the prime was infected or otherwise manipulated in a nefarious way?
Yeah.
Right, so we have to be careful there.
Well, I'm just thinking about it, we do monthly recoveries, but we're really focusing on our primary backup.
Right.
Which, ideally, that's what you want. That's going to be what people are most comfortable with.
Yeah.
It'll be the fastest. But now you got me thinking we need to test that, the push to the cloud. We've done individual files,
Sure.
but I don't know that we've ever done a server.
Right.
And anyways, we might have some work to do.
Right. I would say stress test it, in peace times.
Yeah.
Right. Because that way you're not caught off guard and you already have the muscle memory. Because when you pull things from offsite, there's a delay. Even with all the technology we have today, we're still kind of subject to Sir Isaac Newton's physics laws, right? There's only so much you can pull across the wire for a certain amount of time. And so if you don't know that offhand, hey, if I pull down a 4 terabyte VM, it's going to take this amount of time. If you don't know that ahead of time, that's going to be problematic. And then kind of diving a little further into that, when you put things into an archive tier of cloud, right, which is a whole nother basket of worms to get into, then there's automatically another delay, because we talked about tape. Well, archive from the cloud perspective, right, like an Azure archive tier or AWS S3 Glacier, for instance, right? Wasabi not so much. But these archive tiers are basically cloud tape. And so no matter what you're trying to pull back, that clock is going to start at 12 hours, right? So when I'm consulting my clients, about, hey, where should I put my data? Well, it's saying like, well, how often are you going to pull this data back, or those types? We have to have those types of conversations. So Anthony, I agree. If you probably should be testing pulling things from the cloud just to make sure.
Yeah, and like I said, we've done individual files, but I'm just thinking, we actually on our Palo Altos, and we're we've got champagne taste but beer money, and we do use Wasabi. For the cloud. You can't beat it for the price.
Right.
I know that we're losing some stuff, but like not going with your cloud instance and some others.
Yeah, that's fine.
But we've taken individual files. Well, I'll just say this: our backups uploading. We see the Palo Alto, and it's at night, like it's using quite a bit of bandwidth.
Right, yeah.
And we have a 10 gig pipe, but we only allocate a gig to ourselves because we resell some services. But I'm thinking, even though our upload's a gig, which would take a while, to get certain servers.
Right.
If you had to do all of them, I can't imagine how long that would take, which would be good to know. But what I don't know, is Wasabi pushing a gig up to us?
Yeah, yeah. And your mileage may vary too, because there's 2 other customers I work with that are legitimately right across the street from each other, right? And they both use Wasabi, but they have very different experiences for pulling data down. Like one, it takes twice as long.
Really?
Why? There's no rhyme or reason to it sometimes. They have a gig connection. They're in the same region.
Yeah.
All these things are the same, but when it comes down to recovery, their experiences are vastly different.
Okay.
Right? So.
Well, to my folks, if you guys are watching this, we got some testing to do. So it's a good thing we're doing
it. It is, and one way to mitigate that, right, kind of getting back to that 3-2-1 is, what we're seeing more people do is replicate data from one of their Rubrik clusters to another.
Yeah.
So that's going to give them that geographic protection. So in case you lose your primary cluster, you're not necessarily beholden for pulling things down from the cloud. There is a commensurate cost associated with that, so you have to kind of balance that sheet out, right? But that in some cases will mitigate the necessity for having to pull things down from the cloud in the event of a regional or catastrophic loss of cluster.
Yeah, and that's something we've actually kicked around. We keep our we keep our Rubrik compliance at our primary, our headquarters data center. We've got 3 areas that we can store stuff in, and we're 25 minutes from Wilmington, so when the hurricanes hit, we're very afraid of hurricanes. We've been hit. Matter of fact, when I started at Ford County, we got hit with Florence, and I got to sleep in my office for 6 days. It was a great experience. But
sounds like it.
So that's always in the back of my mind. And anyways, we've been kicking the idea of we've got a district office that's 50 miles west and pushing it there. And I think one day we'll get there. We're doing some more networking stuff, but I think we're at the point where we could probably move that. But I think we need to consider that too.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So I've heard a lot of, especially with the county governments, a lot of hacks where they have lost their backups completely.
Right.
And you hear all this talk about immutable backups. I was wondering if you could kind of talk about what immutable backups is and any recommendations.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a good point. And do some research I was doing, like you can find this with like Deloitte and IBM security reporting. Roughly 75% of people who are impacted by a cyber event have their backup data manipulated in some way.
75%?
75% of the people hit by a cyber incident have their backup data manipulated in some way or fashion, usually deleted.
That's a very high number.
It's a very high number because most people's strategy for data protection does not include someone behind the firewall, right? Because you think about our traditional way we've done all of our backups and everything. Got more audience joining in for you, Anthony. The way we traditionally do our backups is we want to make it easy to get to, right? For the infrastructure team, like, hey, I need to restore files, SQL database, whatever. You make it easy to get to. Well, the bad guys know that. Right? And so you have these lurkers in the environments who've already built persistence just hanging out, and all of a sudden your backups, the lifeline for your entire organization is sitting there on the network, available via SMB, available via NFS. So along came a spider, and we figured out very quickly now that backup data has to be held to as high, if not a higher security standard than normal data.
Yeah.
Why? Because that's your lifeline. So along came this concept of immutability. And, we're here at NCLGISA. How many people would you have to walk by before you have someone screaming immutability at you, right? It's important, but how you achieve that immutability, I think, is even more important. Because you could just say, hey, I have immutability, I check a box, right? But what does that even mean?
Yeah.
Right? And so for me, when I define immutability as data that cannot be edited or cannot be changed, right? And that goes a long way. There's so many things that encompass that, right? It starts really with ensuring your data is survivable, which means like all the rights of the backup data has to be done out of place. No one can unilaterally log in and affect that data, right? That's part of immutability, right? No one can change an NTP server time and automatically start expiring your data out, right? That's a piece of immutability.
Yeah.
So there's all these pieces and parts that just go into immutability that sometimes not everybody gets all those things.
Well, honestly, you're blowing my mind because when I hear people talk about it, it's like it's off of our domain is what I hear.
Right.
And, it's on a separate VLAN. But really what you're talking about, to me, it almost sounds like zero trust for backups.
It is. It is absolutely zero trust. Like, you can't trust who's logging in because you don't know who they are.
Yeah.
Right? Even if someone is logging in ostensibly that they're allowed to, what if it's an impersonation?
Yeah.
Right? And people are like, oh, I have MFA. Right?
Yeah.
Great. So did Microsoft when they got hacked by Lapsus.
Yeah.
Right? So MFA is not the end-all be-all. It is a mechanism that you need. It's a layer cake. Right?
Yeah.
All these layers, like security, ogres and onions, all have layers.
Yeah.
Right? And so, the MFA is good. You got to have that. But then you have to have some sort of checks and balances in place. Rubrik uses retention lock, right, where someone cannot log in and unilaterally make a change that would be destructive to data.
Yeah.
Otherwise, your immutability goes out the window. It's a paper tiger at that point, right? Again, NTP, like there's some solutions out there. I'm not going to name any names because I don't want to be famous for that. But there's some solutions out there that rely on system time or NTP for data expiration. So what happens if you roll that clock forward to the year 2055?
Yeah.
The software is just going to do what it's meant to do, right? So immutability is removing agency or access from the data, right? The air gapping, right? The encryption, having those things in place. Having like a file system like Rubrik, it was just a pinned-only file system. Meaning whatever's written cannot be edited, cannot be changed. It is as it is, right? All of these things, and to your point, basically focus on that zero trust mindset just for the backup data, because any chink in that armor, someone's going to find it.
I'm really glad you answered that. Honestly, I'm not gonna lie, this is kind of news to me.
Sure.
I would expect a lot of people are doing, either they're using, I expect a lot of people that are saying immutable and they're using a non-domain account, like they've got it.
Sure.
But I feel like it can probably still manipulate the data
Absolutely.
quite a bit. So
Absolutely. I mean, it's you're not really pulling the wool over someone's eyes by going, oh, this is not a domain account now. It doesn't matter.
yeah,
Right. I've even had people say, well, my backup software uses a local server time. It doesn't use NTP. I'm
Yeah.
protected. I'm like, okay, so a threat actor is not going to go in there and roll the clock on that server. Like,
Yeah.
you're not really doing anything, right? These are very, very, very smart, motivated individuals. These little, like, sideshow Bob tricks of smoke and mirrors is not going to fool someone dedicated to being and living and owning your environment.
and I'm just thinking of some of the NTP servers I've seen in the past. Usually they're not a whole lot of security on that, or they're an add-on to another box.
Right. A lot of people don't know that there is a secure version of NTP
Yes.
that most people don't use. Right.
Yeah.
When I used to do all my networking, I would just point all my networking equipment at like pool.ntp.org or something like that. Right. But again, you can just jump into a domain controller, which is one of the first things that's going to get attacked anyway.
100%.
To own the domain services, most everything in the environment is receiving their time from that domain controller because there is a single authorized NTP server, which is usually your DC, your PDC. So if I own that, I own your whole network.
I'm neither going to confirm or deny we're doing the same thing with time. But anyway, yeah, I have looked at secure NTP.
Yeah.
And that's something I think we need to look at. But anyways, that's a very interesting take, and
But just make
that
sure
makes a whole lot more sense.
Just make sure the backup data is unassailable, right? And I talk a lot about data survivability, right? Because it's not just immutability. Survivability is no access from nefarious folks to the data. No unauthorized or unilateral unfettered access even from authorized individuals because you don't know if their account's impersonated or not, right? So if you remove the visibility of the backup data, if you remove anyone from unilaterally being able to affect that data, and the file system, the bare bones system that you're applying for that data, if that is major data unchangeable, uneditable, then you've achieved a very good semblance of immutability.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about this as you're talking. I mean, with our Rubrik appliance, we have immutability, but with our Wasabi, I know that right now we don't, just based off of...
Yeah, because that's a whole nother layer. 'Cause I get that question all the time. Hey, I've written all my data in Rubrik. I'm immutable. Yeah, we can talk about that. They're like, okay, great. If I archive somewhere, does the immutability move with it? No, it does not. Because the magic of what makes Rubrik work is on the cluster. It's the file system at its core. You can achieve immutability in the cloud, right? There's like object lock or blob level immutability for all these clouds. You can do that, but it's not on by default.
Yeah, it's not out of the box.
Right, it's not out of the box. Like, and Rubrik has all those things, like you power it on, everything's automatically true, right? You're encrypted, you're immutable, you're air gapped, all those things are true.
Okay,
so
awesome.
Yeah.
All right, next one is how do you ensure data integrity and data reliability on your system?
Yeah, so you kind of talked about a little bit of where you say, hey, sometimes we download a file from the cloud or sometimes we do restorations. Like that's step one, is making sure you have the muscle memory to achieve those restorations for like data testing. Because if you don't ever like restore anything, then how do you even know your backup data is actually valid, right? So along with that though, I think data should be fingerprinted upon ingest. So we're gonna fingerprint that data, we're gonna apply a checksum value to it, and we're gonna store the fingerprint and the checksum along with the data. I think that's the first key. That way when you restore, there should be a mechanism in place that basically looks at that checksum, makes sure it matches the fingerprint so that you know the data you're restoring was the same data you backed up. Super important.
Yeah, so I mean, just like a hash on anything.
Just like a hash.
You're downloading, make sure it wasn't manipulated.
That's right. You have to have that. So that's going to be a mechanism that's going to give you like at least one portion of that data integrity. Is just identifying that the data has not changed from the time you backed it up to the time you stored it. Spoiler alert: not a lot of people do that, by the way. It's actually pretty intense to do that kind of thing to the data. Then I think from a resiliency standpoint, and this is why I love hyperconverged systems, is that the data should be distributed across all portions of the hyperconverged environment, right? So you need multiple nodes, you need multiple disks, right? And you want everything, including like the software for the backup system itself, to be distributed through the entire file system, right? So I can lose a node, I can lose a drive. You just want that resiliency, right? Because spinning disks, they break. Flash drives, they get worn out. And so you don't want a loss of a drive or loss of something like that to cripple you. So that's part of the resilience piece of it. And then when you talk about those data restorations, and this is why it's so important, are they meeting the RTOs that you've set, right? Because again, we talked about just a little bit ago, like if you restore a whole VM down from like Wasabi or wherever, How long will it take? Do you know that? Do you have that written down somewhere?
Yeah.
Hey, if I restore these 3 servers, which I can deem are keep the lights on KTLO, how long will it take me to bring them entirely down? Right? And does that match your RTO?
Yeah, I was going to say, and I can say this, if we were in that situation, I would be expected to know, which I'm a little
100%.
scared right now because I don't.
That's right. Absolutely. You're expected to know those things, and it can be very difficult unless you're like drilling these things all the time, right? How do we get good at anything in life? We practice. And I think a lot of times people just take backups for granted, going, I put it over here, it's fine. But then when they get asked, Anthony, if you ask your team right now, hey, I need you to bring down the 3 top most applications we have, bring them all back from down the cloud, right? And then spin them up in a test environment so I can see how they work, right? There's so many moving parts to that with your day jobs, you might not have time for that. But we gotta have to make time for that because you don't want to go from a peacetime to a wartime situation and not have that plan already in action.
Yeah, and that's something, honestly, we've got a long ways to go, but we've been getting better. One example, so, we use you guys, but for our core systems that our co-op relies on, it's our CIS and FIS, Customer Information System and Financial Information System. We had been paying the organization that, makes our system for years. And, I had been there for 5 years and we had never once tested it out. And anyways, I told the folks, I said, if we're going to continue to pay for this, we need to test it out. And I said, and just verify it's what we need, what we want. And honestly, it was such a tremendous learning experience. And, going forward, we're not going to do it. We probably won't do it. We may do it either annually or every couple of years, but that's something, we learned a lot and we had other departments involved, so they could test the application, and what they do for their job.
Right.
And we learned quite a bit that wasn't apparent that, but that's what doing the drills and stuff like that, it's the only way to know.
It's absolutely working those kinks out. And as the situation, or perhaps even our conversation today, moved from just backup recovery and more cyber recovery, the drilling of those operations becomes even more critical because, most people think, well, I have a small window, RTO to bring these critical services back online just in a peacetime situation. But what about when everything's on fire, right? And then you have even more people breathing down your neck. So just some people, kind of flounder during pressure. Some people sharpen. I think you find out a lot about your team, or teams when you do these things. But the most important thing is understanding to get from A to B, there's all these steps. And by the way, as you mentioned, look at all these caveats we need to fill in too.
Yeah.
So it's very important. One of the last pieces about data resiliency or integrity and resiliency, and I talked about this earlier, is controlling access to the platform. Right, so that's part of the integrity. You don't want someone going in there and kind of monkeying around with things, right? Changing things on you. So preventing access, having that fingerprinting and checksum values on there, right? Distributing all the loads across like an HCI platform. I think that's going to get you like the integrity and resiliency as best you can, honestly.
We have some low priority. We've got some data that there's not if we lose it, it's not the end of the world, but we don't want to lose it, and we use pure access for our main stuff and great system, but it is costly.
Sure.
And for this stuff, I was like, you know what, we can put something on some spinning disk, and I'm not going to name the appliance, but we got a spinning disk system, and I think we did RAID 5, and there was some miscommunication. I wanted a hot spare in there, and it wasn't done. But anyways, we lost one disk, and we got the one on order. We didn't have one on hand. I was planning on it being a hot standby, but we had to, by the time we got it and we started doing the rebuild, another disk failed. anyways, a little side note, but it was just something
But again, that's what I'm talking about, that distribution from, and this is why, I'm really happy I'm seeing a lot more of HCI and hyperconverged infrastructure everywhere.
Yeah.
There's just so much more resiliency and redundancy built into it. There is a slight commensurate uptick in cost, right? But again, to your point, like if there's a misconfiguration somewhere, you don't have that hot spare, you need it to rely on other portions of the system. Because you don't want to fail out and then you lose data because of something as simple as, well, this little spinning disk broke.
Yeah, that's nothing of importance we put on those systems, and like the pure, some of our recovery is even based off of them, but anyways, it's a great solution.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of cloud-based solutions for backups. Can you talk about some of the pluses and minuses
Yeah.
of some of those, some of the things to look for?
Yeah, I run into, not to get too much in competitive things that I do, but one of the big competitive sort of situations I get into is people looking to shrink the footprint of their data center. And one of the ways they feel like they can achieve that is, well, I have all this hardware over here for backups. What if I didn't? And that's a good mindset to be in, especially when we're expecting to see more and more people move into a cloud environment, especially with what happened with VMware lately, right? More people are going, should I go Hyper-V, should I do Acropolis? And I'm over here going, why don't you just put it in Azure, AWS, or Google, right? Then you never have to worry about a hypervisor again. And so I have these conversations because I have a heavy consultation background. I don't only talk about Rubrik with people. But what I've observed is that there are some big names who are now running cloud only entirely. And it sounds good from the spec sheet. It sounds like they can do all these amazing things. I looked at the PowerPoint. I read their website. They say they're the best. But then when you get down to the sort of nuts and bolts of it, what I've observed is that if you have something that's entirely cloud-based, okay, that means you're reliant entirely for backups to run and to restore data, peacetime or wartime, on your internet connection.
Yeah.
Right. So, and then we're also, again, always beholden to Sir Isaac Newton. There's only so much you can push across, the media. Right. So I envision if you're just doing hey, I recover a file here and there, or maybe I recover a VM here and there in peacetime, it's probably fine.
Yeah.
It's probably fine. There are some use cases where that makes sense. But in the event of a cyber incident, right? What's the first thing people do in a cyber incident?
Unplug the internet.
Unplug the internet.
Correct.
So now their ability to do anything with that cloud base now is completely reliant upon them getting that internet back up and running.
Yeah.
Now, in a cyber incident, every action you take, generally speaking, has to be approved by a cybersecurity team or your security analyst or CISO or someone. They are probably not going to just have you turn the internet back on just so you can do restorations, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot. So that's another piece of the puzzle. And now we're talking the speed of which we talked about RTOs. If you have to pull every single thing you have down from the cloud, right? We talked about if your cluster went away and you're beholden to Wasabi only, how long would it take to get that data back down, right? So again, there is a value associated with having some type of hardware adjacent to the data for that speed of recovery and speed of backup. Otherwise, you're just relying on your internet.
I guess I just want to, I don't think I quite understood this. You're saying there's some people that are basically using the cloud as their primary method of backup?
Right.
Okay. I have not. But anyways, that clearly has some flaws because you're right that, them unplugging the network, that's, we've had several cybersecurity classes here at NCLGISA, and that's one of the first things that you got to do.
Standing operating procedure, unplug the internet. I was part of a recovery for a city in 2020. And the CIO very, very clearly instructed me, run to the data center, unplug the core switch, unplug everything.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. Now, these days, what most security professionals are advising is unplugging the internet is not really doing anything for you. It's not really buying you anything because the threat actor is going to know.
Yeah.
And they might go ahead and start triggering things as soon as they start seeing internet, getting cut out. So they're being very careful with that. But yeah, I mean, so if there are some big names out there with the everything runs in the cloud, the storage is in the cloud, there's like a zero data center footprint, and they use that as a big selling point. And for some people that makes sense. That's fine. My mind goes to okay, in a cyber incident, you unplug the firewall. Then how are you doing anything with data?
Yeah, you're not.
Right, you're not. And now some of them will say, oh, I'm gonna put a cloud cache on-prem. So some of your data actually lands on this cloud cache before it goes up to the cloud. So that's how I get around no internet. We just talked about 75% of the people being attacked have their backup data removed as part of that.
Yeah.
So that cloud cache is going away.
Yeah, they're going to.
It's gone. It's gone. Every time it's gone. So again, you're relying upon that one, single point of failure. For most people, because most people don't have SD-WAN and they're not having, fiber coming on the east, fiber coming on the west. Most people aren't doing that. If you are, fantastic. You're way ahead of the curve, and the network engineer of me approves of that. But again, when you're beholden to that one ingress point to do anything and everything, that's a huge problem.
I mean, it sounds like kind of what you said earlier, just maybe not in these words, but focus on your main system and
Right.
make sure,
Right.
you know, it's resilient and, you know, immutable.
Right. And that's just the, you know, so let's just say the internet stays up, right? You do have the ability to then, you know, back up and restore. But in a cyber incident, there's so much more to the equation, which you and I have talked about a lot, to just having the data there. Right?
Yeah.
Like, how do you know what was impacted? How do you know what the attack surface was? How do you know what they potentially have from you? Because most of the time when data has been encrypted as part of an attack, it's being exfiltrated already.
Yeah.
Right? How do you recover how do you recover cleanly? Like, how do you identify those IOCs in the environment? How do you remove those, quarantine those, and so they're only recovering good data? If you're reliant on all of that strictly from a cloud-hosted perspective, it's probably not going to scale. And again, RTOs.
Yeah.
Like, how quickly is that going to happen?
Well, that and just thinking about, you know, if you recover, you're gonna reintroduce whatever the attacker put on your system.
Yeah, that's a big problem. You know, from my days of incident response, that was one of the biggest pain points, I think, is how do I know what's clean? How do I know that when I recover, I'm not just reintroducing the original infection?
Yeah.
Right? If you don't know that, you're going to get stuck in this like wheel of torture, and you could quit. I've seen people quit.
I've heard of a lot of people quitting. One of the actually one of the local county governments that got hacked, the guy left like within a couple of days.
Yeah.
So that was, I felt for them.
Yeah. I had someone tell me that their BCDR plan from a cyber incident was to make sure that their passport was still good.
That's being brutally honest.
I love the candid response. I like, fair enough, but let's talk about maybe not having to do that.
Yeah, I think for one of the reasons, like, so we do the cloud, and I guess I'm kind of wondering if my mindset was right on this. The way I looked at it, never to recover like an immediate item, but like, so I'm trying to think. I think on Rubrik we keep, I think we have 2 weeks of data, and you know, granted, you never know, but you know, you hear about malicious actors. Sometimes they're on your system. You know, I think it's that duration is shortened
much
in the past. But you know, if you go back in the day, you'd hear about them being on your system for, you know, maybe up to 6 months, maybe even longer.
Absolutely, 180 days is roughly what we're seeing as the dwell time.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, or maybe I would say unfortunately, it's reduced to about 5 days now.
Okay, so that's drastically changed.
Drastically reduced. So it used to be, you know, hey, I'm backing up with the data, but if I only have, 14 days or so of data, then if they've been in there for months, I have backed up the bad things.
Yeah.
Right? I get asked that all the time, with Rubrik is, hey, if malware gets in my environment, are you going to back it up? Yeah, it's data. We're going to back it up.
Yeah.
Right? But there's more to it than that.
Yeah.
But now the dwell time is so low because the threat actors have unfortunately got really good at what they're doing. And the only reason they have is really ransomware as a service, right? Someone spends, I would say, I looked it up one time, I think through Deloitte or maybe IBM threat reports, like an investment of like $35 a month was netting them like $20,000 a month.
Oh, wow.
As ransomware as a service.
Yeah.
Right? And they're just churning it.
Yeah, that's what they don't want to wait. They want to make their money.
They want to make their money, right?
Yeah.
And so they've gotten so good. They've automated. They've used AI to their advantage.
Yeah.
And also they've pooled their resources to build this product that's easy to use that any idiot off the street can use. So they're just using those things, getting in the environment much sooner, and then leaving much sooner because they're able to grab what they need so fast, right? And that's so scary because you think about modern security tools, like trying to find someone who gets into your environment in 5 days or less, unless they're just new on the job, their first day as a hacker, you're probably not going to find them in 5 days. So you're legitimately going to have situations where you're backing up bad data.
Yeah.
And then when you go to recover, if you don't have a mechanism or maybe a team with enough gumption and willpower to manually search those file trees looking for those things, how do you recover cleanly? Right? And so if I'm pulling all of my data down from this cloud area, trying to push it down on my 1 gig internet pipe, where am I doing those actions? Right?
That's what, downloading that, that's what, how would you determine that? That's something that really that's something I've had in the back of my mind if we ever had to recover. And honestly, that was a lot of the reason we went with your guys' appliance to do with that. But
yeah, there's a lot of advantages to having, compute and storage and networking adjacent to the data, right? Having that isolated recovery environment right next to you, right? Because eventually can you get all that stuff back from a purely cloud managed solution? Absolutely, right? But again, how long do you have to wait?
Yeah.
Because I know this from experience from my incident response days. You're gonna have someone over your shoulder every 5 freaking minutes. Are we there yet? Like kids in the minivan. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Right. So those RTOs might be a certain length in peacetime, but they're almost halved, if not quartered, in wartime. So
I'm just thinking our CEO, he made a statement one day, and he's like, "Well, with all of our systems in place, we'll be back up within a day or two." I looked at him. I was like, "No." I said,
bold move, Cotton.
"Yeah." I said, like, I pointed to someone else that had an incident, and they had recovered in about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I said, that's honestly pretty fast for
Yeah.
a lot of organizations.
Yeah, 22 days is roughly the average if the backup data is available.
If the backup data is available.
If the backup data is available. Remember, data survivability, step 1. If the data is available, roughly 22 days of recovery is what it takes.
Yeah. I know some of the local organizations that had ransomware, I've heard some things just they never got back. And
right.
But I heard basically it was almost a year for one organization.
Yeah. It's again, that's why we spend so much time and I spend sometimes just the entire hour I'm talking to somebody on a phone call about step 1, data survivability. Because if you don't have that, nothing else matters. That's why I talk about the supremacy of that that prime copy of your data.
Yeah.
That's everything, right? You have to have that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing the importance more and more.
Right.
As we
Yeah,
talk.
you have to have that. Like when I was part of that local city back in 2020, they actually were using Rubrik.
Yeah.
They were using Rubrik out of the box, so they actually had the ability to recover, and we had 911 services back up in less than 30 hours. Which was unheard of in 2020,
Yeah.
right? And then this was on a Friday, they made payroll by Tuesday.
Wow.
Right? Because the data was available, right? Now, there were a lot of questions in that boardroom, like where do we recover from? How do we know we're not reintroducing the infection back in there? Like, where do we go? How many days do we go back? Because you have to balance that. I want to go back 30 days. Do you? Because that's a lot of lost transactional data.
Yeah, that's a lot.
That's a lot. You want to go back like yesterday. Day before at the worst case, right? Because you got to make up that data that's been transacted somehow. And if you can't.
I guess maybe you could answer this. This is kind of off topic, but I feel like when people are in that situation, they're recovering, I feel at some point where they have to just make a best guess of how far to go back. And I mean, sometimes you can see some stuff and they were there at a certain point.
Yeah.
But like the day before, a lot of times you think they weren't there, and you just got to take that shot. I mean,
You do. Yeah, you do. There is, if you don't have the correct tool set, then your biggest tool in your tool belt is hope, right? and hope is not a very good strategy.
Yeah.
So you have to have the right tools. But if you don't, I mean, it's reasonable to say that a lot of your decision making is based on, do I use yesterday or day before?
Yeah.
Because I can't do 3 days back. That's too much data loss, right? And data loss is anathema to all the backup engineers in the world, right? So it is a lot of guesswork unless you have the right tools, right? And I don't want to necessarily plug what Rubrik does here, but one of the things we can do is not only safeguard that data, but we give you those insights.
Yeah.
What was the blast radius? What's the best known recovery point? It's usually going to be the day before, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's that. But then okay, do I just start recovering immediately? No, because if you do that, you might reintroduce infections back into the data, right? So you have to have a way to detect and quarantine and get you back up and running. The problem is, if you don't have a dedicated threat hunting service, it's manual. And I know this because I did it.
Yeah.
Spinning up 30, 40 servers at a time and just looking through Tom's hardware, Bleeping Computer, CISA.gov. Hey, I know I'm under a RIOC, so it has these IOCs. So then I have this little piece of paper with dots on it, a checklist. Okay, let me check the registry. Okay, that's missing. Okay, let me check firewall. Okay, great. Doing that manually for hundreds of servers.
Looking through all the logs.
All the logs, looking through all the registries, and it's you and several other people just churning and just going through a checklist. And that's the manual way of threat hunting, right? How long would that take?
And also identifying the logs that you don't have that you wish you would have.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Right. There's so much guesswork. And I'm sorry that humans just aren't as good as machines. That's just the way of the world. Skynet will one day be a thing probably. But, if I were a betting man and I were using an AI-empowered tool to scan that data, locate things, and quarantine, I would trust it 100% over my own personal work.
Yeah, I can see that
Right.
for sure.
To human is to err, right?
Yeah.
Or to err is human, whichever way you want to say it. So if you're relying upon human services to do these things, something may fall through the cracks.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't, how do you know?
Yeah.
How do you know?
And that's what I know that's true because I heard about an entity that got had an incident, and then another organization that they worked with had was tied into that incident, and they got a cut of the data to review, and all the stuff that the original they had cybersecurity services and they reviewed all the data.
Yeah.
And they missed some stuff,
right?
And it was identified later on by the second organization,
right? Yeah.
So it definitely happens. I mean,
yeah, it does.
We're human,
right? Exactly. We're human. We're going to miss things. And especially if you talk about like an incident response situation, you're like 30 hours deep with no sleep. 40. Now for parents, that's probably not a big deal, right? But for me, who doesn't have kids, like I need my sleep. If I don't get my tight 7, I'm no good. So if I'm sitting there kind of bleary-eyed, running on nothing but adrenaline and Red Bull, I might miss something. Right? And
Definitely.
Then let's just say you get back up, a week or two goes by, and maybe you're not feeling as confident as you were now that you've slept a couple of times. What do you do then? Do you go back and go, hey, I might have missed something?
So I know there are a lot of cloud instances out there, and honestly, I just recently spoke with it's our statewide organization. They're using your guys' cloud instance.
Right.
And I guess what are some of the benefits of using your guys' cloud instance over some of the competitors?
Yeah, so, ultimately, S3 is S3, right? Storage in the cloud is, and you can get, I like Wasabi a lot because it's tierless, and it actually does have a lot of resiliency built into it. The downside to that is if you ever needed to instantiate something in the cloud, you couldn't because there's no compute there, right? But that's okay. You may not need to do that. But then we have the big players out there. Like you have Azure, AWS, and Google. And with those, the advantage there is they have multiple tiers. So there are instances from a cost efficiency standpoint that you can get some of your data into a cheaper tier than like Wasabi.
Yeah.
Right? But you have to like bifurcate and send some of your data to a warmer tier and some of your data to a cooler tier. Rubrik actually has Rubrik Cloud Vault, which was developed with Microsoft, and it's actually backing it on Azure. It uses 2 tiers, the Azure Cool and the Azure Archive tier. Okay. So you can actually, Rubrik will let you bifurcate your backups to send like, hey, some of my data, maybe my daily backups, I'm gonna put in this warmer tier, but my monthly and yearly, who I probably will never touch, but I need for like compliance reasons, let me put this in the cheapest, deepest tier possible so I'm not paying premium price for it, right? The advantage that Rubrik would have with our Cloud Vault is really comes down to security and air gapping, right? Because right now, if someone got into your environment, they're going to go north and south, east and west. And with your organization, Anthony, if they go north and south, they're going to get the keys to the kingdom to get into Wasabi. So if a bad actor got into your Wasabi instance, are there any safeguards that would prevent them from just deleting the bucket?
No.
Probably not, right? And that's okay. Like, there's no bad answers to that because, there are certain things you can do in other clouds to sort of mitigate that. Most people say, oh, I MFA it. Again, MFA can be hacked, right? Yeah. MFA overload, MFA and SIM hijacking, these things can be bypassed. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do MFA. You should definitely do MFA, but don't think it's like the Fort Knox vault around your credentials. The advantage Rubrik has here is that because the Rubrik Cloud Vault bucket, so to speak, is not built or managed by credentials that you own, right? Then that data is sort of obfuscated away from any threat actors who are running and rounding your environment. Right? So even if they were able to log into your Rubrik console, they still have no direct access or no agency over that data living in that vault.
That was when you were talking earlier about it. That was the first thing that came to mind. It was just Wasabi. Like I know that they could use a typical or not an account that we have and log in and just obliterate everything.
Right. Yeah. And so that's kind of the sort of charter for threat actors is they want to remove your agency to your data to give you no other recourse other than to pay the ransom. Yeah. Right. And so that's why Rubrik created this air-gapped, vaulting for that archive data, so that even if someone was in your environment, even if they had all the credentials you possibly could own, there's no way they can attack your data.
Just something that's coming to my mind. It's actually you're scaring me, honestly. I was just thinking this might even almost be worse. And I need to check this out, but I'm wondering if a malicious actor, if they had the credentials, could they just download our data to their site, and have
what would prevent them from doing that?
Yeah, That's something we need to check into.
I would check into that. Yeah, I will tell you honestly, transparently, I don't know enough about Wasabi to say whether that could be done or not.
Yeah.
But I would say if you're taking notes, that would be a note to take to just
Yeah.
check and see how that would even be feasible. Right.
I think we've got another action.
I think you have another action item. Yeah. Sorry, Nick and Earl.
Yeah. Anyways, this is a great conversation. I can't help but apply it to my own organization.
You have to, right? And the things I talk about, the people I talk to, if we take anything away from, it's just awareness and self-scouting. Like, don't be afraid to kind of take a fresh look at what you're doing every so often, every year or two, and just go, is this the best practice of 2024, best practice of 2025? Because technology always evolves. Like we've seen, the power in our pockets of our phones, is like 1,000,000 times more powerful than what we used to put a man on the moon.
Yeah.
So technology is advancing at a breakneck pace, which is good and bad, right? So I think if we have to be, willing to do self-scouting, willing to just kind of look at ourselves in the mirror and go, am I adhering to the best practices? Am I putting everything in place possible to mitigate what I think might happen? Most people kind of get stuck and, well, it's good enough and it's fine and nothing bad's happened yet, so I should be fine. And I think that's a very dangerous place to be because you're really standing on the precipice of disaster.
Yeah, and that just makes me think. Well, one thing we've kind of picked up, we're not a lot of times people get on a product and they're afraid to change. We've actually changed quite a few vendors out. And a lot of things, and honestly, it's been for the better, much better. But I do remember when we onboarded with you guys, I was like, we'll look at their cloud instance later.
Right.
But we've never gotten back to that. I do think maybe we should take a look at that. But I do remember one thing that I liked. It was basically just with using your cloud instance, you can control everything from your appliance.
Correct. Right. It's kind of baked into the SaaS management plane. So you don't have to have like a degree in cloud. You don't have to have any certifications. You really don't have to know anything at all about cloud to use Rubrik Cloud Vault. And I think that's the beauty and the simplicity of it. Because I think IT teams are at times shrinking, but still asked to do more and more and more.
Yes.
And that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Right? You can't know it all, and you can't hire everybody. Right? Because you and others are competing for the same resources, and then most IT personnel I know are mercenaries, right? Highest bidder wins, right? And so if you don't have that expertise, sometimes even the mere mention of cloud can be very daunting to the people in the room because like, oh well, that's so much I got to do and everything. Look, just make it easy, right? And I think Wasabi does a phenomenal job of making it easy.
Yeah.
Rubrik Cloud Vault just does it easier.
Yeah, it's not a separate instance or
Right.
anything.
Yeah.
But anyways, you gave me a lot to think about with that. So for organizations out there, what would your approach be to just testing and validating backups? How would you recommend an approach to that?
Yeah, so this actually touches on what we kind of talked about earlier, right? That validation, integrity of the data. And the way I've typically approached it is I've set up like scheduled sessions where I'm testing all types of data restorations on a scheduled basis. So like they say, hey, do a DR test like 2 times a year. I would do like an actual true validation test of the backup data probably every 3 months or so. And I would do different data sets every time, right? So like, for instance, we already know files are the easiest thing to do because they're pretty static, right? But bring down a VM, bring down like an old database server or something like that. Something that's very finicky and touchy.
Yeah, that you don't want to do it to.
That you don't want to do it to, right? So and we talked about this earlier too. I would not only pull data from a local platform, pull it down from the cloud too, right? Make that part of your testing. As you need to test every avenue of where the data is going to be and bring it back down to the source. You have to do that, right? So you need to know like, does it work if you pull data out of the cloud? How long does it take? Write this stuff down, right? Because you have to have these metrics to measure yourself to know if the process needs improvement or if it works the way you think it's going to work. So it's always the testing. So bringing down data from the cloud, all types, big, small. Don't be afraid if it's going to take a while, right? You need to know those things. You got to write those things down and maybe keep it in a report somewhere.
Yeah.
Right. I used to do that all the time when I was doing BCDR testing. I'd have a workbook that I had to work through, and everything that I brought down from the cloud or brought from the local appliances I was pulling back from, I had to write this stuff down. How long did it take? So if I pull a file from my local appliance, how long does that take? Okay, well, it's a 7 megabyte file. It took X amount of seconds, right? Okay, here's a VM that's like, 500 gigs. Okay, this is coming local. So just lather, rinse, repeat that whole way so that you could theoretically hand your data restoration handbook over to someone brand new to the organization and they can run that for you. Yeah.
I know we've got some notes. I'm just thinking we've started doing what we call test plans, and I mean it's common practice. But
Yeah.
if we're recovering a server, if we need to upgrade, like these are all the things you need to test to
Right.
do recovery. I'm just thinking we really should start doing that with our backups. I know we have some notes, but just kind of make it like a test plan, and
Yeah.
these are the things to look for and stuff like that.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
and add those things. Did you check a server that you didn't check?
That's right. Yeah, just rotate it. So if you do true backup testing validation every quarter, you don't have to do everything at once.
Yeah.
And you can just say, hey, Q1, we're going to test these VMs from local and these VMs from cloud, and then maybe switch it. Right.
Yeah.
So you're not always recovering the same things. So by the end of the year, depending on your test plan, you may have tested every single recovery situation for all your data.
And that really should be a goal, honestly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If possible, if feasible rather, you should be 100% confident that no matter what you bring down for either the appliance or cloud is recoverable. And the only way you know that for absolute sure is testing it.
I don't know why this is in the back of my mind, but this is probably some old school, outdated methodology.
Right.
But back in the day, it was really kind of at the cusp of VMware that I think a lot of this changed. But we used to always export the database separately and do that. And I see now that I really don't find a lot of organizations doing that. Is that just outdated methodology, or is there something there to that?
Well, it depends on the technology. There are some technologies that's the only way you can recover databases, right? There's other technologies, like Rubrik and others, where you can basically do a point-in-time recovery, for the databases, and without having to export it elsewhere, right? You can just kind of like just mount that database. Again, the value of hyperconverged technology is having it onboard storage. I can just mount this database and then run queries to pull data in or pull data out, right? So I would say, depending on the technology, that mindset, that methodology is probably pretty dated, considering the technology we have now. But there are still use cases for that type of restoration.
Okay.
Yeah.
One thing that I was wondering. I mean, obviously we've invested a lot in our backups so they don't get encrypted or something like that. But I guess if they encrypt the data, it's not going to matter. I was just thinking if the server, if it might have something malicious on it, you might be able to just pump the export, re-import the database itself and build from scratch. I don't know if there was something there.
And so that's not a bad sort of like thought exercise, because I get asked all the time, about, well, if the VM's encrypted or otherwise nefarious software on there, can I just get the database off?
Yeah.
Because typically speaking, threat actors are not doing anything to structured data, right? Not saying it's impossible. I'm not going on record saying that.
Yeah.
But most detection of malicious activity doesn't actually look at the structured data. It looks at everything around it and infers that there's a problem. So what you're saying is actually kind of valid. Yeah, you can, from a fully encrypted, or fully down server, you could, with reasonable expectation of success, pull the database out by itself. But again,
how many copies of your data?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Anyways, it's just it's been in the back of my mind.
No, it's a good thought. Yeah.
I got out of the IT industry somewhat. Well, I was doing cybersecurity and didn't do anything, with backups and stuff like that, and got back in it, and I just noticed I was like, no one's exporting databases anymore. I was like, I just felt like in my mind it was wrong.
Times are changing. Times are changing.
All right. So as I mentioned earlier in the show, like one of the things I was just thrilled about is you guys quarterly you'll meet with our folks and kind of go through some stuff and make sure everything's working right.
Yeah.
What are you guys doing on those quarterly checkups?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't know if other people do this, and that's fine if they don't.
I've never heard of it.
Right. So even back from my consultation days, the one thing that I think is so important is relationships. And I never want to be viewed as a vendor. I want to be viewed as a partner. Like we're sitting on the same side of the table, so to speak. Not right now, but you know what I mean. And so I think that's one of the things that Rubrik does very, very well is just staying connected with our people, with our team, with our friends.
Yeah.
Right? It actually, I don't like saying I have clients. I like saying I have friends because I do.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that relationship is very important because there's a lot of trust involved in that. And so there are some mechanical things that I'm looking at when we're doing these health checks or quarterly business reviews, like how's the cluster doing? Are you good on size? Do you have any projects? You know, are we backing up with 365? What about our structure? There's a lot of things I go through because Rubrik has a big portfolio that I want to make sure that you are protected in all ways humanly possible. But I have my health check report. One of the biggest, most important things that I point to every single time I get on that call is, how are we doing? That's what I care about, because that's how I'm measured, really, is how are you doing, right? Are you in such a way that if someone says, hey, what do you think about Rubrik? And if you're not going, I love it. I love Brian, I love Jen, I love everything about it. If you're not there, then what did we do wrong? And how can we get you there, right? Because I think that's most important. So that's really what I'm looking at. There's a lot of, like, again, I have a report that shows like sizing and all these things, all this stuff. I just want to connect with you. I just want to make sure you're good. And here's why. This is why it's important. I knew from my consultation days that if you didn't trust what I said, if you didn't believe in me looking out for you for your best interest, then if I put this like $1 million quote in front of you, right? You're gonna be like, well, I'm not doing that. Why would I need to do that? But if you trust in what I'm telling you, because I truly am out for your best interest, if I put something in front of you and going, Anthony, you really need to do this.
Yeah.
Then you're more likely to go, all right, well, okay, well, if Brian's saying I have to do this, then I probably need to do this, right? So I believe in that approach for everything I do. I think it's relationships entirely, almost entirely. I can't imagine not doing it from a relationship standpoint, right?
Yeah, it was just, a lot of times I feel like we'll work with a vendor, they'll meet and greet with us and, you know, be our best friend. And then as soon as you sign that contract, it's the last time you've seen them.
That's right. Wine, dine, PO, renewal.
Yeah.
That's usually what happens, right?
Yeah.
You know, the wine, dine, you with the best. Hey, we're the best as friends. Let's go to a game. Let's do all these things. Let's go have all these things. Great. Here's a PO. Great. Next time you talk to them, renewal. That's terrible. That's a horrible way to do business.
It is. And it's really, it's rare. I can think of one other, maybe two other vendors that kind of have the same methodology you guys, so I think that speaks a lot about your organization.
Yeah,
and it means a lot to us.
Well, that's great. I'm glad that's true, because, you know, like I said, we always want to be very friendly, and trust is very hard to build and very quick to lose, right? And I've even had other OEMs, like, you know, I've worked with like Palo and Fortinet on some combined accounts, and when they see how I operate, they actually change how they do things.
Yeah.
Like I say, hey, when's the last time you talked to, you know, this person here? And they're like, oh, I haven't talked to them in like, you know, I don't know, 12, 18 months. I'm like, why? What are you waiting for? How do you know they don't need anything? How do you know everything's not good?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, I haven't seen a lot of support cases come in. That doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, it doesn't.
That doesn't mean anything at all, right? Break fix does not mean anything like that.
Yeah.
So I think it's super important. We have to be in front of people, or, you know, in person or remote. You know, COVID kind of threw us a curveball, but that's okay. But if you're not building those relationships, then you are a commodity. And that's one of the, if you're a vendor and what you provide is viewed as a commodity, then you've already lost, right?
And that's what, you know, we've got, not really even you guys, we've got another vendor where, you know, it comes with a, you know, a little bit more of a price tag. And I'll say, but they treat us with, you know, we get white glove service.
Yeah.
We can reach out to them. They reach out to us. We reach out to them any second and can get an answer, like a real answer.
Yeah.
And that means a lot to us. And anyways, that's great that your organization does that.
Yeah, everybody I talk to and meet with, you know, my cell phone number is in my email signature.
Yeah,
and
which is rare.
Right, and I legitimately have people calling me all the time. Just sometimes it's Rubrik. Sometimes they know I've been a consultant for 20 years. They're like, hey, I'm running into this weird issue, like blah blah blah. What would you do? And I'll answer them, because that's just the kind of guy I am. Like, just because I work for Rubrik doesn't mean I'm not a consultant first.
Yeah.
I just happen to work with a cybersecurity company for a product that changes the world, right? But I'm still me. I'm still Brian. I still have a bunch of networking knowledge running around in my head. So some people, I got somebody who calls me from some locations I haven't worked with for years, but I did design their network. They'll call me and ask me those things.
Yeah.
It's all relationship building, right?
I have noticed that you get some of us that are on Rubrik, you get us in a conference and we start talking about backups. I'm on Rubrik. They stick their chest out.
That's
Anyways,
right.
I notice everyone I've ever talked to that's on Rubrik, like, they've said nothing but great things.
Yeah, you know, nothing in this world's perfect, right? But for what Rubrik was designed from the ground up to do and how we've evolved to meet today's challenges with the cyber incident and cyber recovery, you'd be hard pressed to find something better. Anthony, I'm not gonna lie to you. If someone did it better, that's where I would be.
All right, just to wrap this thing up, I'm kind of wondering, just regardless of what platform folks are on,
Right.
for backups, what are some practices or what are some things that you think everyone should be looking at?
Yeah, test, right?
Yeah.
You should know the stress limits of your platform, whatever it is. You should know the capabilities. You should know in and out the security gaps that may be present and have some way to mitigate those, right? That's one of the biggest best practices. But, developing that robust testing method we talked about, right? Running through that method, right? Not being afraid of self-scouting and identifying those gaps and having the courage to go, hey, you know what? We have this gap.
Yeah.
But here's the plan to fill this gap. Right? I think a lot of people just kind of cover it, sweep it under the rug and put the rug there and you got that lump under the rug, right? Well, I'm not going to look at that. You have to have the courage to go, hey, this is my baby. Sometimes it's ugly. That's fine, right? Let me pretty it up a little bit. Let me fill these gaps. If you're not doing those things, you're really, again, putting yourself and your organization at a risk.
Yeah.
So it's all about testing, developing that robust testing method, tracking those results. How did we do? Right? I think that's super important. It's not focused on enough because there's so much of a human element. There's such a variance in what could happen, but doing that stopwatch, testing yourself. Not only how long will it take me to get this data from A to B, how long did it take me, the person, to get the mouse, move the mouse, click the things. The entirety of the process has to be measured and recorded in some way. Because you can then eke out some efficiencies. Okay, maybe instead of going here to here, maybe I just go to here to do it, right? So all these things have to be vetted out. And so that's why I said just test. That's the best way I can, and just having the courage to identify where you may have gaps, bring those up to your leaders and say, I think we should address these things and here's why, right? Because you just don't want to just don't be the organization or the people that, I work from 8 to 5 and if it doesn't exist between 8 and 5, I don't care about it, right? I always tell people all the time, they call, hey, I'm going to install, we're working on a data protection project, right? Oh, we're working on a Rubrik project. Data security is not a project. It's a process.
Yeah,
and it never stops.
Yeah. One of the things I run into, and I just see, a lot of times there's teams where they don't have the bandwidth, and really just what you're saying though. I guess what I would say to folks is, you don't have to solve all these things overnight.
No.
Take it one step at a time. Even I've had some projects that have taken us years to get to.
Sure.
And would we like to get there faster? Yes, but we're getting better each day.
Right. Yep.
And anyways. All right, well, I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I've learned a lot, honestly, myself.
No, thank you for having me. This has been amazing.
So, anyways, it was awesome.
Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate you, man. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
We hope you enjoyed that conversation between Brian and Anthony. We appreciate Brian coming on, and we'll definitely do more interviews in the future. If you're not already subscribed to the podcast, please subscribe at wherever podcasts are found. And if you don't mind, share the podcast with someone who you think will get a lot of benefit out of it. We appreciate all of our listeners, and until next week, this is Off the Wire.